Hey everyone, welcome to our lecture on looking back a little bit of the trends in the music industry, about how we've gotten where we are today, and having a little fun with it, and looking, about some possibilities of what composing, making, and consuming music might be in the future. And I would encourage you to all to keep thinking in this way, keep thinking about what's coming next, and keep on your toes as you move forward as musicians and artists and business people. So the first thing we want to do is talk a little bit about just kind of where we come from, and where we took leading to where we are now. And I don't want to start with radio or the phonograph and kind of the older music technologies, etc. We kind of covered a little bit of those before, but really where we are now, especially with the how music is being produced and consumed, it's mostly being produced and consumed on the internet by and large, especially in the United States. There are some other places around the world where that's not quite the same. But in the United States, really music being shared and/or consumed on the internet really started to take off with the invention of the MP3, which is this kind of quote unquote lossless format for compressing music, where it really makes music files much smaller than they used to be, and makes them easily exchangeable on the internet. And when this happened, these are kind of the MP3 started to be conceived of and kind of worked on in the 1980s, but they really started taking off in the 1990s. And it was about 1999 that the kind of illegal file sharing site Napster popped up and really changed the game and propelled us to where we are now. And so it's kind of important to understand that the kind of the impact that Napster had, and all kind of file sharing had, on the music scene. Before that, you had to go to a record store pretty much. You could listen to the radio, go to a record store, buy a record, a CD, a cassette, whatever for your music. And then after Napster, people were downloading files, converting their music into MP3s and sharing it all over the internet. It was estimated that like in around the height of Napster around 2000, that on colleges and university campuses, 61% of their web traffic, which is huge, was being used for MP3 sharing. So it was a huge impact in the late 90s, early 2000s. And by the kind of end in 2001, it only lasted a few years before it was shut down by a Recording Industry Association of America lawsuit. But Napster was shut down in 2001, and by the time it was shut down, about 22 million users were sharing music on Napster. There are still some file sharing sites out there now. They're a little bit sketchy. You probably get a computer virus if you're using peer-to-peer file sharing. But really what it did is Napster really propelled the music industry to rethink how music is consumed, and really propelled us into our kind of streaming service age that we're in now. So really, if you look back, you can think of several things happening after the Napster was shocked the music industry with its new way of consuming music. And what happened is, it, again, like I said, propelled us to this kind of streaming service that we're now, in the U.S. at least, really dependent on. In 2003, iTunes started, and it really opened up huge catalogs of music for everyone, for 99 cents a song, which is, it seemed inexpensive at the time. You can pick and choose your songs. You didn't have to buy a whole album, so it was kind of revolutionary, and it was legal. So unlike Napster, it was kind of, at least uh, uh, for the most part, accepted by the music industry and by consumers. iTunes also came about with the invention of the iPod, which is an MP3 player. It really, again, changed how music is being played, rather than having to carry around your large CD player with only a big folder full of CDs or cassettes or whatever. On the iPod really kind of revolutionized music consumption, and that's translated over now into all of our smartphones that now have supplanted the iPod. But in 2005, the streaming service Pandora kind of came about, and really started to change again how we consume music, in that it was offering us recommendations through algorithms. Computer algorithms would see what we liked, what we listened to, how long we listened to it, etc., and then provide recommendations for new music to kind of keep us in the stream, keep listening to the service. Pandora was, fairly quickly overtaken by other streaming services, especially ones like Spotify. In 2008, Spotify really took over the kind of streaming world, and there are many other examples. But nowadays, really, you have at least over a third of people who are listening to music in America, at least, are using Spotify or some other kind of streaming service. So you can still see the kind of huge growth in this chart here, the Spotify growth. This is paying subscribers for Spotify. There were probably 83 million of them by 2018, which is huge. And there's many tens of not hundreds of millions more people using Spotify and other free streaming services. So this is only a small slice of the pie, really. But you can see the kind of growth in streaming services. There are some areas of the world that are a little bit different. You don't have this overwhelming dependence on streaming music. Japan's a good example where CDs still account for about 85% of music sales in Japan. And so for some reason, that's a good research paper. I know some of you are looking into this question for your project, but for some reason, Japan is kind of stuck with the CD for a lot longer than the US has. And again, like I'm saying, Spotify, Pandora, these are all just examples of, kind of the most popular streaming services. And this is the way we consume music nowadays for the most part. But there are a lot of other alternatives. There's some other free-ish alternatives. I would be interested if you guys know of anything rising or new and innovative. I've heard of things like Hype Machine and the 61 and Kligo or Klygo. These services are kind of free-ish music streaming services that are not necessarily competing with Spotify and Pandora and things like that, but at least other alternatives to the kind of standards you're getting on these other streaming services. There's also been a resurgence not only in the fact that we're all listening to streaming music nowadays rather than having large libraries at our house or on our iPod. There's been a resurgence of kind of old, a throwback to the vinyl, and so there's a big uptick in sales of records that certainly when I was younger, everyone thought they were going out of style. They're fragile, they're breakable, they're large. Requires a pretty big setup to actually play them in your house. But vinyl has been a really interesting a story in terms of this kind of resurgence. And there's some talk about how cassettes might do the same thing. Cassettes are actually growing the sales of cassettes are growing at a pretty large percentage recently. For the most part, vinyl sales, they're rising, and they're mostly concentrated in the kind of rock genre category. And you can see on your chart, there's over 4.5 million albums sold in 2017 in the rock category, and then kind of dramatically drops down after that. But despite this kind of meteoric rise of the sales of vinyl, it still makes up a very small proportion of albums sold in America. So there's about 8.5 million vinyl albums sold in 2017, and this is compare this to about almost 75 million CDs, almost 65 million album downloads through things like iTunes and stuff like that, and 377 billion streams, which is huge difference in how we're consuming music. So vinyl is still an extremely small slice of the pie, even though it gets a lot of kind of free advertising, kind of a lot of talk about how vinyl is making a comeback. But when you really look at the numbers, America is streaming music now almost exclusively. And like I said, in addition to kind of this resurgence in vinyl, there's this idea that the cassettes might make a small comeback, and we talked a little bit about this in our lecture on music and capitalism, how there's some bands and some people are trying to kind of work around these large corporate structures and are producing cassettes for their audience, and because they're cheap to make and they're smaller and they're easy to make. But cassettes really still are a minuscule portion of the music industry, the music consumption in America. Really, there's not even 100,000 cassette units sold in 2017, which was huge. It was a big jump percentage-wise, but still a very small portion of what's being produced and consumed. So by and large in America, as I said, 377 billion streams of music. So it's by far and away, the streaming is the way Americans are consuming music nowadays.
I just wanted to throw in a couple more charts for you to look at, just explaining the kind of monumental shifts that the record industry has undergone in the last 20 or 30, 40 years. And you can see on the left, really the kind of peak in before 2000, the record industry was making quite a bit of money off of the physical sales of albums, and that really the compact disc made it the vast majority of that, and that started falling apart really after, again, like I mentioned before, the launch of Napster. And you can see that on the right-hand side of your screen, where in 2000 to 2002, the music revenues really started falling, and that continued for many years until very recently, until about 2015, where we actually see revenues stop falling and actually start increasing when people started to actually want to pay for premium subscription services. As I mentioned, the streaming format is now really the vast majority of music being listened to in the United States is at least streaming rather than the sales of physical albums.
And so this whole lecture is really talking about how we consume music, what are the trends. So we've discussed, we've largely in America shifted over to streaming music through the internet online, and very fewer people are buying physical pieces of music, whether or not that's CDs or vinyl, etc. But there's some then trends. We want to talk about trends in the music industry, and I want to kind of relate this back to general technological trends and the growth of the internet, and kind of maybe help you understand why this is important to think about, and why it's important to think about quickly and closely, because things are becoming technology being adopted at a faster pace than what has been in the past, and it's shown by this chart on your screen here, where you have kind of years of across the bottom, and you have years until the units are at 25% adoption. And as you can see, like in electricity, it took 45 plus years to get to 25% adoption. And as you see, that the line goes down, and from electricity to telephone, car, radio, etc., the line's going down in terms of the number of years it takes for people to adopt technology like this. And so as you get down to more contemporary times, you have the mobile phone and the internet being very quickly adopted by a large proportion of the country. And so this trend in the kind of the quickening of technological adoption will continue. I don't know what the next technology out there will be for consuming music. We'll talk about some possibilities, but just so you know, the adoption technology is accelerating. That's one important thing to remember. And again, you can see this same sort of thing, that this adoption curve, and then here you have years on the bottom, and then some the adoption levels up to 100%. And you can see these proliferation curves, and what you see is, if you look at the very beginning, like I said, grid electricity has kind of a slow slope, right? They're all very quick in general. They're all adopted within almost 100% adoption within a decade or two. But if you look very closely and you kind of zoom in on the right-hand side of the chart, what you're seeing is the curves are getting more and more almost vertical. And so again, this is showing you that the adoption of new technology is accelerating. People are adopting it at faster rates, and so you have smartphone usage, is nearly almost a vertical line, as opposed to say radio, actually, back earlier on, which is much more of a slower curve to reach 100% adoption. So the most important thing here is that the verticality of technological adoption curves is happening more and more. People are getting new technology and picking the things right up, and it's becoming widespread in its use much quicker than it used to be in the past. Another really important thing to understand is how we're consuming music in the US, at least, is by streaming, and that is dependent on internet usage. And so I thought I should throw up some information about worldwide internet usage, because there's a huge change coming online, or I guess more people are coming online, and that's going to have a profound impact on how music is produced, who is producing, who is consuming it, and etc. And so you see a lot of on the charts on the left, you see the percentage of internet users throughout the world, and there's a large, almost half the internet users are in Asia. But on the right hand side, you see a chart of kind of internet penetration rates, and so you have 95% of North America has access to the internet. The worldwide average is around 55%, and the lowest percentage of internet penetration is in Africa. But that said, the growth potential in Africa for more people using the internet is huge. And so, for example, in Africa, it saw a 10,000% growth over from 2000 to 2018 in the growth of internet users. It's still only about 36% of the people connected, but again, that growth potential is huge, and that really has to do with people adopting new technologies, kind of leapfrogging over old technologies. And so a lot of people are using mobile internet and mobile phones for their internet access in Africa and Asia, and that's leading to a really quick adoption and a quick transformation of how people are consuming media. Like I said, all of this will play out in the next decade or two in terms of the numbers of people consuming music, consuming all media really through the internet is going to really dramatically shift. You have right now the vast majority of the internet users are in Asia, but then again there's a huge number of Africans coming online, and it will only kind of get more and more entrenched throughout the world really. There are a couple problems to this as well, though, and I think maybe if you've read the news in recent days, there's some talk about this, so that the internet is in some ways becoming fragmented, and there's a bunch of different reasons why. There's really three forces behind the fragmentation of the internet, or the potential fragmentation of the internet, because right now it's basically one big open playground, and that's changing. Especially, I think the last force driving this fragmentation, this governmental intrusion on the kind of openness of the internet, is probably the most important and has the potential to change how the world interacts and how the world interfaces through the internet. But the three forces driving fragmentation are technical. There's different different ways the internet is operating in different very kind of technical terms that are leading to potential kind of different paths in the internet. And one example would be the dark web, where people go to buy all their illegal drugs and things like that, how it's not being indexed, it's not being listed by search engines really. So it's that is one example of the kind of technical fragmentation of the internet. There's a commercial fragmentation of the internet. There's a bunch of different ways this is going on. Really, how there's filtering and blocking of websites, or social networks and other things are kind of filtering out undesirable content. There are you probably have, if you've watched YouTube at all, you may have encountered these kind of geo-blocking of content, where if you're living in the US or living in Europe, there's certain content that is not available to you based on your location, and that's sometimes that's commercial, sometimes that's governmental. There are these idea of these walled gardens where you're going to be paying for, if you're not a paying user in a certain area, you won't be able to get access to certain aspects of the internet. And so there's a lot of different commercial reasons for how the internet is being carved up. But by far the most important, and possibly the most important fragmentation of the internet, and this all has to do with how people are accessing music content. The most important is really the governmental regulations on internet use. And so we have the great example of China being very censorship driven, and so they've basically created, as a side effect, a separate internet. People in China, unless you're using a VPN, a virtual private network, the content you're able to access in China, the internet content is severely limited, or at least censored. But this is also happening elsewhere. So in the EU, in the European Union, there's a lot of discussion over privacy and discussion over intellectual property, and this is also creating it's fragmenting the internet in a sense where you're not allowed to view, or not allowed to broadcast or see certain things, or to download certain things. And so all these things, these three different forces are driving this, have the potential to fragment the internet. We don't know how that will play out in the end, but what this means is that the kind of free exchange of content, the free exchange of music, may be impeded by these things, and maybe people will find a way around them as well. So it's something to think about, something to realize that when there's billions of people using the internet, we're not all necessarily using the same thing, not all seeing the same thing. there are some other cultural trends, and the cultural trends are really difficult, more difficult to talk about than the technological trends that are going on in terms of media consumption. But there's a few, I think, important ones to recognize. The first is that there seems to be a lot of anxiety and this desire for escape in today's world. A lot of people are I mean, I think there's been a survey where there's nearly 2/3 of people think that or use kind of content, music, art, whatever, to take their mind off of negative things going on around the world. So there's a sense that there's a kind of a very kind of maybe dangerous or difficult or challenging or just disturbing world out there. And so many people are using the internet, using art, using reading, etc., to kind of escape. And so there's this sense of anxiety and escape that has started to at least be more prevalent, I guess, in society than it used to be. And so that trend of this kind of use of media as an escape from the anxiety of the real world is something that has been increasing and is accelerating, and we'll see if that continues. It may or may not, but it's something to think about at least. And the second cultural trend that I think is really important now, and we'll see if it continues this way, is that far from just the only thing selling, it used to be the kind of sex sells was the old adage, but now really it's anything that's shocking or outrageous. That's what's selling. That's what is getting eyeballs and eardrums glued to your preferred medium. But kind of the shock value of something is really what is driving the kind of cultural gaze, I guess. And that, again, the shock value and the kind of outrage value of something is, again, another cultural trend in terms of what we consume that is influencing how long we watch something for, how we watch it, and our reactions to it. So the kind of shock value is an important cultural trend we should consider when designing and or when we composing music, getting it out there, or even when you're just consuming music as a listener. The second idea that has really been accelerating, and there are competing ideas whether or not it will continue this way, but is the idea of filter bubbles. And really what this is when you're on your Facebook news feed or on your asking Google for recommendations, what you click on once influences what you see next in your recommendations, I guess. And there's a potential for these types of recommending algorithms to further insulate you from new ideas or things that might disturb you. So there's this really kind of backlash against this idea of filter bubbles, because we get filter bubbles or echo chambers where you're only surrounded by content that you like, that will keep you glued to your screen, or content that you find enjoyable. So the kind of algorithmic recommendations that were, at least in the music world of Pandora, kind of pioneered and that are now prevalent in all sorts of streaming services, those have the potential to kind of lock you into a certain genre of music. And there's a lot of people who are worried that you won't ever see any new music, or there's things out there you'll never experience because you're being fed in your recommendations these things that are generated on or dependent on your previous viewing and search and interests. There are some examples that are counter to this. So there's an example in 2013 when YouTube actually won a technical Emmy for its personalized video recommendations. And really the thought was that if you get too many recommendations that are too similar to what you're watching, you won't actually go with those recommendations. And so YouTube has done a good job of actually giving you something that's a little bit different than you're watching, recommending something that's a little bit different. And this is a way to kind of help you explore something different, but it's also a way of keeping your eyeballs and your ears glued to YouTube. It's a way of keeping your attention. And again, YouTube has been well known for doing that kind of thing. But despite this kind of technical achievement that YouTube had with their recommended videos, these solutions are still just about keeping your eyes and ears glued to the same channel, whether that's YouTube or Facebook or whatever. And some people have argued that a truly unique perspectives or personal perspectives are becoming harder to hear or harder to recognize or harder really even to create in a world where connections, whether that be virtual or real connections, are the most important. And so I think it's important for all of us to recognize these several cultural trends that I'm mentioning here, and maybe think about them when you're consuming music. Think about the potential to buck these trends, I guess, because these aren't necessarily positive things. So thinking about ways to soothe your anxiety without escaping, and to recognize that things are often being broadcast because of their shock value, and to also recognize that the potential for filter bubbles or echo chambers is real, and we need to do things to combat that, because in the end, we all want to have a diversity of options in what we consume. I should talk a little bit about the kind of technological trends that are going on, and this is feeding directly into how music is consumed, how music is produced, and also the potential for new ways of creating and consuming music in the future. And so I'll give you a really few real brief examples here. Really is that, and I talked about computing power and size in a previous lecture, but let's just recall that the image on the left there is an old IBM drive that was 5 megabytes of a hard drive, and it weighed over 2,000 pounds, and it cost the equivalent of $2,500, or sorry, $250,000 today. And now we have these hard drives on the right that you can fit in the palm of your hand, that are 6 million times more storage, 2,000 times smaller, and thousands of times cheaper. And so there's this sense that computer technology is increasing. There's some talk about how this can't continue forever because of kind of basic laws of physics that will actually hit a stopping point. And there are others who argue that there are new types of computing that will come out that'll keep that progress towards faster and smaller and more and cheaper and more ubiquitous computing going. You can see this sort of trend as well in music technology. So you go from the record to the CD, to the mini disc, or whatever you want to say, all these lost technologies, down to the MP3 and down to streaming services. And so you see this similar technology, kind of the how computers have enabled us to consume vastly more music, have access to vastly more music, and that may continue to happen. We'll see. There are some other technological trends that I think are interesting to look at, and one of those is the use of computers as composers or as composing assistants. And so I thought I should highlight one of the older ones, really, and this is one called Emily Howl, which is a computer program kind of developed by researchers and professors at MIT, and specifically David Cope. And so David Cope created Emily Howl, which is a computer program in the 1990s, and really it's a set of interactive interfaces that allows kind of both language and musical communication. And basically what Cope was doing is teaching a program how to compose music in a particular style. And so I thought you should listen to a little bit of example of this. Again, this is an older you can call it artificial intelligence or algorithmic composed music, and I'll link that below this lecture. So pause for a second and listen to the Emily Howl fugue, and know that this was created by a computer with some input by a human, but mostly it was an algorithmic choice. So listen to that and kind of see if you could tell, if I hadn't already prefaced this, if you could tell if this was an actual person composing this, or can you tell that it's a computer-generated piece of music. So I hope in listening to the Emily Howl fugue, I think, for me at least, it's really kind of that music is skirting the edge of, if I didn't know beforehand, if I could actually tell that it was a human-created music or a computer-created music. That's, I think, fascinating, and we'll see that's only accelerating as time goes by. But if you want to read more about this, I would recommend looking into David Cope, spelled C-O-P-E, but his wrote a book called Computer Models of Musical Creativity. You could look more into the use of algorithms as composers. And I wanted to give you a couple more examples of AI composed or AI assisted composed songs. The first one is one called Daddy's Car, and it was really done or with the help of scientists at the Sony CSL Research Lab, and they kind of created the first ever songs composed by
artificial intelligence. And the researchers, again, they develop these flow machines that kind of learn music from huge databases, and then kind of explore different combinations and all this kind of stuff to produce their own music. And so Daddy's Car is composed in the style of like a Beatles song, and I think if you go down to the video linked below, you can almost instantaneously hear this. And this is another example, again, of AI composed and assisted songs. And so this is in combination with a French composer, Benoit Carré, who arranged and produced the songs and wrote the lyrics. But so what you're seeing again is this melding of human and AI composition. The second example I have below is a piece called Hello Shadow, and this is composed again with AI helping in the composition. And I think I'm saying this right, but this an artist, Kiza Strome, was really interested in the idea of AI helping him compose things. And what he did is he brought in some his favorite melodies and kind of little stem pieces of music that he put into the machine and kind of output many different varieties that they were then chosen and selected for this song. So in the Hello Shadow piece, the melody was generated out of these stems that were put into the computer by an artist. And so you kind of, again, this is kind of machines working with humans. Strome sings the vocal line that follows the generated melody, and then he also improvised on the pre-chorus. The choir in the chorus is also generated. And so what you see here is really a great example of melding, and I think the video also does a nice example of kind of this melding of these two worlds. So I'd say pause the video and listen to both these examples, Daddy's Car and Hello Shadow, and really as kind of further examples of the influence of AI and kind of neural network machines helping and assisting with the composition of music.
So the next example I want to give you is a good example of a collaboration between an artist and kind of how she uses different AI and kind of computer-assisted composition software out there. And this is Taryn Southern. She's a pretty well-known artist who has really kind of tried to be on the forefront of music and AI and things like this. Her album came out in 2018, 2017, something like that. And it was titled I Am AI, and it was just billed as kind of the first ever musical collaboration between a solo artist and artificial intelligence. She used a variety of software like Amper Music, IBM's Watson Beat, Google's NSYNC, and Ava. And also she kind of tokenized the music on the blockchain, basically meaning the kind of revenue and distribution helps that kind of blockchain use helps kind of split the royalty payments automatically between her collaborators. This video I linked here that you can take a listen to is Welcome to the New World in 2018 is what it was. And it was created in VR also, and it was partially created by AI, partially the lyrics by a Southern and around 240 other collaborators. So take a listen to this and kind of see what you think. Now, having watched that video, a lot of the kind of the rhythm track it was very prominent. That was actually generated by a company called Amper Music, which is no longer in business. But when it was in business, I generated several things there myself. It was kind of like a point and click thing where you go and click down menus and it'll generate some music. A lot of the I actually had generated the exact same rhythm track as she uses in this video. You can actually it was pretty basic generation, but a lot of the music kind of ended up sounding like kind of the bad daytime TV cooking show music, but the Amper Music no longer is in business right now. But it still produced some interesting results with Taryn Southern's work. So having seen some examples of kind of AI-assisted music in the last few slides, I thought I should talk about where things are going, or actually where things have been and where things are going. As you see on your screen, actually, one of the top images is actually a piece of artwork generated by AI that actually won an art contest in Colorado last year, I think. And it was really kind of shocking to people, and you got the artist in a bit of trouble, the guy who had it generated for him. But I think it shows really the kind of influence and kind of possibility with artificial intelligence and art generation. But I gotta say, generative art and even generative music has really been around for quite some time. I'm gonna give you some historical context to this. So actually, in Mozart's time, it was really quite common to have kind of dice games that were played to kind of make a piece of music by rolling the dice and kind of fitting in pre-composed measures of music and adding those all together as kind of a party trick or kind of a party game. So there's a really good example on Canvas I have of a Mozart piece from around 1757 where people would roll dice and match those die rolls to again pre-composed little snippets of music, add those all together, and then play them together as a kind of a party trick. So that it's called musikalisches Würfelspiel, sorry. And this is again like been around for quite some time. So you can pause and listen to that. I also put on the Canvas site some of Brian Eno's 77 million paintings, and this is again kind of early algorithmic driven music composition, kind of ambient music. And so take a second and listen to those two examples just to kind of get an idea of the scope and how things have changed over time. A lot of those were used kind of either rolling die and having pre-composed music, or having a bunch of kind of pre-composed pieces of music that were again kind of put together by algorithm in Brian Eno's example. His example was actually supposedly matched up to kind of different paintings and things. That's how he kind of adds this whole ambiance to it as well. A lot of music producers or music composers working with AI these days are actually working not necessarily to kind of use the kind of symbolic generation of music like Mozart writing down a little snippet of music, or Brian Eno writing down or producing, bits of music that were then assembled by algorithm. A lot of people working in the field are now actually working on kind of generating music from the waveform up, and really I think this is quite different and actually quite a bit more powerful. A lot of information is lost when music is kind of reduced to kind of symbolic representations of like A sharp or G sharp on a piece of paper. How a lot of kind of information is lost once that's happened. And so just like art generation being kind of art being generated out of noise, visual art being generated out of kind of pixels and noise, so AI is AI researchers are working with kind of the waveform of music and generating music out of that to kind of to move forward. If I want to ask if anyone has used these programs, or have you have any kind of use of AI in your composition process, it might be interesting to think about that. So quite a lot has changed in the last a few years, but I just want to say that kind of the idea of generative art has been around for quite some time.
So I just wanted to give you a little bit of the kind of history of generating music from the waveform. OpenAI was on the same company that makes ChatGPT, was for a while doing some research on their Jukebox website application about generating music from the kind of waveform up, from the ground up. And I left an example of this on Canvas so you can listen to, of kind of the jazz in the style of Ella Fitzgerald. OpenAI has basically abandoned this as far as I can tell. They haven't made any updates, and a lot of their links are dead now because of a lot of the competitors in the field making much better progress than I think they had made over the many years they were doing it. But if you listen to that Ella Fitzgerald piece on Canvas, it's what I find interesting about the generating music from the kind of waveform from the ground up, really, is it actually generates a lot of kind of background noise in terms of the crowd, and you can kind of hear, if you listen, kind of hear like the sort of what sounds like a performance in a bar or something like that. Whereas a lot of the other newer apps like Suno and others really are generating very clean audio, and I think it's really interesting that how maybe kind of generating from the waveform up might offer you some different possibilities in terms of kind of creating a whole sound, almost kind of like a live sound in some senses. But if you listen to that piece I post on Canvas, it gets very strange very, very quickly. It's because again, there's a lot of noise in this generating music this way. So take a listen to that. So I thought we should have a little fun and play a little guessing game, a little quiz game. I posted 4 examples on Canvas that are different pieces that are either generated or composed by a computer or a human. And your job is to listen to those 4 examples and then come back here and we'll discuss what they were. And as you're listening to them, really kind of think about what clues you into whether or not they're computer generated or human composed, and write those reasons down, and we can come back and get the answers. So having listened to those 4 clips, the first example, what would it sound like to you? Hopefully it was pretty obvious to you that it was generated by a computer. It was an example of Google's recurrent neural network performance, RNN. This is kind of an earlier, much earlier style of music generation. It worked pretty well, but I mean, there's some clues that gave it away that it was generated by kind of older software that's not quite up to date with the things you can generate today. The kind of genre and the pacing and the melody really kind of shifted kind of erratically. and really didn't quite make a whole lot of musical sense. So this is a good example of kind of older software music generation. The second example, which was Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, but sung in the kind of big band style, kind of reminiscent of Frank Sinatra. That was actually sung by a human, composed by humans, and performed by humans. So that was actually the example here, first example we have that is not computer generated. Although I thought it was interesting to throw this in here because the kind of combination of these two different genres, like grunge rock and kind of big band style, really kind of maybe might throw you for a loop in the beginning. There's actually also a video out there of where they took this Paul Anka's work, I think, and then generated a Frank Sinatra kind of clone and added that to it. So I didn't put that in here because I thought you actually should listen to the original sung by Paul Anka. The third example, which was that kind of rap piece in French, that was generated by a computer. That was generated by Suno AI by a user named Renhal, and this is, I think, a good example of some interesting stuff that's being generated by Suno AI and kind of their more recent version. They have a really pretty good sounding music out there. The lyrics, I put them in. I made sure they're. Hopefully, you can understand the French because the lyrics are really oftentimes the giveaway in these Suno AI programs. The lyrics are pretty bad. So if you're actually using these tools or these sites to generate music, I would highly encourage you to write your own lyrics because the stuff that's generated is pretty pedestrian. And the last example was maybe a little bit more challenging. This is an example was also composed by a computer. This is Ava, another kind of music generating app. This is the octet number 1 in D major, but I think, if I'm correctly, it was actually performed by humans, but it was composed by an AI, so it's a little bit tricky there. And the whole point of Ava and as a company really was they actually kind of founded it with this idea that to create a program that could actually take film scripts and generate film scores for the entire movie, which is somewhat frightening if you're in the film industry, if you're writing music for films. But that's kind of, I think, where we're headed really, is a lot of these programs becoming much more competent in terms of composing and or generating the music entirely. A lot of more money has been poured into these types of research efforts by things like Spotify. I think Spotify wants to have the ability to generate music automatically for you and kind of keep you in their ecosystem, just like kind of the car companies like Uber and Lyft and things like that were for a while funding self-driving car research. The audio apps out there like Spotify and that are also interested in music generation that will be tailored exactly to your likes and dislikes.
So, as you can see, the state of music technology is changing extremely fast. When I designed the initial lecture for this topic a few years ago, I thought that completely AI-derived music was decades off, as it's so much harder to do than simple speech. And in some ways, it still has a ways to go. But if the recent advances in AI dubbing are any indication, full music synthesis is just over the horizon, maybe a few years at most. Obviously, this is just my prediction, but I think I stand on pretty solid ground when making it. So, what does this mean for you as music creators and professionals? I think you still might have jobs, but your workflow will probably be completely changed. Just like most of you aren't patching cables in an analog synth, most of you will probably need to get comfortable relying on AI to speed up and enrich your compositions. Rather than spend all your time obsessing over details, you might be able to ask your AI assistant to give you some suggestions, critiques, or recommendations while you choose what suits you most. Does this pose any problems? Can you think of parallels to other shifts in music technology that we have discussed in previous lectures that might offer some insight into this moment of fundamental change? Think back to the lecture on music and synthesizers, specifically the video that featured a bunch of early synth pioneers and their critique that musicians have lost the ability to really hear sound. That designing sound from the sine wave up teaches you something fundamentally important when compared to choosing a sound from a preset bank. Now take that and multiply that problem by 1,000 if you think AI will be intimately involved in your creative process. And by the way, everything you're hearing on this slide is not me. It is my synthesized voice generated from text. Did anyone notice? Will you notice when AI makes creative decisions? Will it matter? What are some issues you can think of? Does this freak you out or get you excited?
So that last slide was kind of a fun thing to put together. That was me. My voice was generated by 11 Labs, so I read about a 30-minute article and uploaded it to 11 Labs, and they synthesized my voice. And so now whenever I want to have my voice read out in a fairly boring monotone with interesting artifacts put in there, I can go to 11 Labs and generate that. This is again showing the kind of advancements being made in audio generation and text generation, etc. So everyone's pretty familiar with ChatGPT being quite good at generating some things. This again shows the audio generation is really moving very quickly. I put this lecture together a few years ago and really could not imagine how fast AI was going to be affecting audio and music generation. So everything you saw on the last slide and the visuals on this slide as well are also generated by AI. You can see some of the problems. Obviously, visually, you can see on the slide how the AI totally garbled a lot of the words I wanted included on the slide. Virtually everything is misspelled or just not even real letters. And if you listen carefully to my voice, I think it's fascinating the way it puts in breathing pauses and things like that. And there's a slider actually on 11 Labs where you can make your voice more variable or more clear and more precise. I found that the clear and precise sounds much too robotic, and so I added some variability in there. I think one of the consequences is it sounded like I have some breathing problems with these long pauses and things like that. But anyhow, it was fun to do, and I think it also just shows you how fast things are changing. So if you're a music composer, musician itself, you're going to be encountering a vastly changed landscape in the next few years, and I think you really have to ready yourself in terms of understanding these tools, understanding how they will affect your process and things like that. I mean, really, it's already affecting the world. I mean, you have good examples of Jay-Z being his voice being synthesized and kind of producing new raps and things like that out there. A lot of other examples of where the quality of the voice dubbing and or music generation is really on par in some cases with actual performers. Not in all cases, but it's certainly happening fairly quickly. So again, keep these things in mind and really kind of have to educate yourself about what's happening in the future to kind of stay up with the times.
And there's some other trends going on in the music world that you saw. I already had you watch some holograms of deceased artists like Tupac Shakur and Michael Jackson that were kind of resurrected from the grave and performed at live shows. So the kind of hologram thing has been around for a while, and it's interesting. These might take off and become more common in live concerts. We'll see. There's also this trend or possibility of kind of virtual reality concerts, and there are many companies experimenting with VR concert experiences like Next VR from Live Nation and Melody VR and others. And there are artists like Imogen Heap who are again pushing this tech, and others are kind of following along. So we'll see. Virtual reality is a little wonky right now, but just like I mentioned before with the video game example, I think you give it a little bit of time before you can see it really taking off. Now, virtual reality has been around for a long time, but it's becoming more widely adopted, and really a lot of different artists are using 360-degree cameras to film their live concert experiences, and then these cameras can be used. You can actually go and be kind of virtually be at the concert and look around and experience it in a new way. I don't think these virtual reality concerts will take over or supplant the live concert experience, but it's a new way of consuming music that maybe will have some more traction as time goes on. There's another example. This is again this kind of computer-generated hologram artist, really, and this is Hatsune Miku, which is a Japanese kind of Vocaloid program, and then also animated kind of hologram star. And I'll just say, pause my lecture and watch this. And this is a live performance of Japan. And so you watched The World Is Mine by Hatsune Miku, and she's, again, this computer program that is wildly popular, has a huge following, especially in Japan, but really been used a lot, and since at least had 100,000 songs to her name, her in quotes, her name, in 2011. And other artists like Lady Gaga and Pharrell Williams, and Hatsune Miku has performed on David Letterman. But again, this kind of interesting use of entirely generated computer vocal tracks and animated things that people are going to see as part of live performances, and really will have a huge amount of fans for it. So again, as interesting as this may look now, I think there's a lot of potential for kind of virtual pop stars to be out there, and maybe Hatsune Miku is the kind of is the first possibly, and we'll see if this happens in the future. So I've been seeing all these kind of the history of music technology, digitalization of music, kind of the spread of music through the internet, and now some of the kind of different options people have for generating and composing music. I think my question is to kind of end the lecture is, will there be any pushback to this type of technology? Just like on the vinyl trend in terms of vinyl becoming more popular, will we be playing acoustic instruments in the future, or will people be turned off by the kind of increasing reliance on computers to compose and generate music? I think this really goes back to what we value. For several of the examples I played you today, the lyrics were kind of the giveaway of whether or not it was generated by a composer, generated by a computer. And I think that once that will probably get better as time goes by. So in the end, when you really honestly can't differentiate between a computer composed and generated music and human composed, what's the value in that? Like, how do we value human composed music versus something that's generated? What are the kind of trends in culture and music and technology, and how these are evolving are all questions I really want you to think about. I think it really comes down to, in my mind at least, there's a lot of value we place that is kind of outside of listening to music as just in our headphones. There's a lot of value we attach to artists themselves and kind of their stories and kind of being involved with them as people, as figures. Then the example of that Hatsune Miku example, which is a bit older, people also attach feeling and kind of get involved with them as a pop star, get involved with these computer images as like they were real people. And so I think as time goes by, this kind of blurring of real and generated and computer and AI and all that stuff will really kind of make us kind of, I think, have to reassess what we value in music and in art in general. So thanks very much. I hope you guys had a fun time with this kind of directions in music technology, and I'll see you next time.